Hello everyone, welcome to another artwork analysis. Now, I talked about storytelling in the previous video and a little bit of value distribution and quadrants. Now, I felt like I didn't really explain it as properly as I should, and perhaps there needs to be another artist I analyze where I talk about value distribution. And I couldn't think of another artist that had similar style but in a different field until I ran into an artist known as Lorraine Christie. Now, her work is very minimalist, very abstract, but it seems to always work, and there's a little bit of Pascal Campion. Now, of course, it's a different field, of course. Pascal is an illustration and Lorraine is a fine artist. But very, very similar styles and the same fundamentals, as I would always say. So, number one, of course, I will talk about value distribution, and I'm going to talk about quadrants again while doing so. So, I've had people talk about, or ask me rather, how do I draw a crowd scene? How do I balance a ton of people walking around in the streets or otherwise? There is an inherent problem when it comes to creating a crowd of people. You risk having too many things going at once, which destroys the composition and any focal points. You want to have a controlled composition no matter what you do, and that comes down to even for chaotic subject matter. So, for example, crowd scenes or war scenes or shipwrecks or something, literal shipwrecks. So, you have to be able to simplify and distribute your values and colors properly in order to create a sensible composition within the chaos. And Lorraine Christie is insanely good at it. As you can see in this particular artwork too, you notice that her work, this seems like it's comfortable. Even though there's at least 6 figures that you can see in this piece, and the fact that these figures are all just splotches of paint. I wouldn't even be surprised if this artwork in reality is not even that big. It's probably like 8 by 11 inches or something. But how did she balance this properly? Well, we have to go back to the idea of quadrants. So let's split this piece into 4 areas again. Let's change it to a different color. So, in my previous video, I talked about how there's 3 values, right? And how Pascal has all 3 values in every quadrant of his piece. Lorraine does the same. Notice how no matter which quadrant you zoom in on, there's always going to be a light, there's always going to be a dark, and there's always going to be a midtone. Works here as well. Again, if you are creating a composition and you feel like it's imbalanced, really think about it in quadrants, and maybe perhaps one quadrant is getting too much compared to the rest of the composition. Now, we have to look into value distribution as well. One thing I didn't mention with Pascal's work as well is not only I'm going to talk about it in Lorraine's case, not only are the values distributed properly through the quadrants, we are also getting a movement of values. So, because this piece is predominantly taken over by the lights, the shadows will naturally get attention, and our eyes are drawn into the clothing, the dark clothing of all these characters. Now, of course, it's easier said than done to be able to capture your eyes towards the composition without leading your viewers out of it. But notice how there is a really nice movement going on with the darks. Now, this happens with midtones as well. If we were to squint our eyes and only focus on the midtones, you notice that the midtones are moving around in a very meandering way. So, another test that you can do for your artwork is to make sure that your values, every single value, every one of those 3 values are creating a nice movement that goes through your entire piece. You do not want to have a piece where, for instance, midtones are exclusively on one quadrant and it's creating no movement. This is going to create a static composition. Always look objectively at how you are distributing your values. I know that you might get baited into just drawing your subject matter and not really think about the composition, the grander picture, but you will save a lot of time if you can simplify what good value distribution you have, rather than rendering what doesn't work in the first place. So now we have to talk about, okay, let's go back to the idea of how did Lorraine make this crowd of people work? Now, we have to think about it when it comes to clumping. What I mean by clumping values is we notice that there's certain areas. Let's destroy the quadrant here. There's certain values, for instance, this dark area. If you were to squint your eyes, that's one big mass. We could even talk about this person on the left here. It's one big mass. We don't need to have separate masses over and over again. Everything is clumped in such a way that even though these are read as crowds of people, these are simplified when it comes to technical standpoints. Yes, from a viewer point of view, we have to think about it as, oh, these are separate people. But when it comes to the value, that's a big difference. When it comes to the values, these are the same. These are part of clumps of values. One of the biggest things you will learn as an artist is knowing that when it comes to subject matter, you do not think of your subject matter as separate when you are dealing with composition. When you are dealing with composition, anything goes. If you can merge values together, if you can merge colors together, who cares if these are separate people objectively? These could be simplified and clumped together. And you always want to simplify, always find ways to put things together. What difference is this value of this railing compared to, well, let's make a new layer. This value, this dark value of this railing, is essentially the same as the clothing on the crowd and the clothing on the main character, a main focal point. Notice how, even though these are different subject matters, These are the same values. So again, never think of it as this is one subject matter versus another. Always think of ways to find ways to group things together, different things together. Hopefully that makes sense. I know this is a bit more advanced, it's harder for me to describe, but hopefully you learned something and you enjoyed the video. I would definitely check out Lorraine Christie's work. Her work is very simplified and it just works. It goes to show you don't need a lot of details to tell your story, as a lot of concept art might try to make you think. Anyways, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.